I was just an ordinary office worker until one day I stumbled upon something I shouldn't have seen. They thought I would disappear. That I would get scared and give up. They were wrong. Blake Investments. The only question is how many more people will suffer before the truth comes out. I was an ordinary employee working in an unremarkable office, doing calculations and making sure everything was in order. My name is Adam Hayes, and I was a junior financial analyst at Harrison and Blake Investments in New York City. I had been with the company for 2 years and, while not a superstar, I was good at my job. I noticed mistakes that others missed. So when I started noticing strange things in one of our clients' accounts, I couldn't ignore it. It started with small things, as it often does. A few strange transactions that didn't quite add up, a couple of suppliers I couldn't find anything about. I thought maybe it was just a coding error or a clerical mistake, but the deeper I dug, the clearer it became that this was no accident. Davidson Electronics, one of our largest customers, was hiding something, laundering money through fake accounts and shell companies. The more I pulled at the threads, the more tangled the web became. I discovered payments to companies that didn't exist, invoices marked paid for services that were never provided. Someone had gone to great lengths to hide it, but there were gaps, small enough for an attentive person to notice. I couldn't just turn a blind eye to it. I printed everything out, transaction records, supplier reports, strange bank transactions, and headed straight for Rick Patterson's office. Rick was a man who, thanks to his reputation, was considered untouchable. His office was a large corner office with a view of the city, and he always looked like he had everything under control. Entering that room was like taking a small step, but the weight of what I was about to say felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. I placed the folder on his desk. "Rick, something's wrong with Davidson Electronics. They've been transferring money through dummy accounts." He didn't even open the folder. He just looked at me. As if he was humorously tolerating a child's complaints. Then he looked at me again with that familiar smirk. "You don't understand, Adam," he said, tapping his coffee cup like a drum. "These clients are too important to question. Just forget about it, okay?" It wasn't even a warning. It was an order. And in that moment, I understood what was going on. Money, power, connections, it was all too big. Bigger than me. Bigger than anyone in that building. And I wasn't going to give up. The next morning, I was fired. Just like that. "Reorganization," they said. "Clear your desk." I walked out with a box of my belongings under my arm, no explanation, no questions asked. No goodbye. I felt no anger, just a cold sense of clarity. They thought they were done with me. But they had no idea what was coming. I drove straight to Mark's place. Mark was one of those friends who never asked questions, he just helped. He had a small, cramped apartment in the suburbs, nothing special, but it was his. And at that moment, it was exactly where I needed to be. I didn't even tell him why I needed a place to stay. He knew I didn't have a big family, and we'd been friends long enough for him to know when I was in a bad way. He didn't ask any questions, just opened the door, threw my bag on the sofa, and told me to make myself at home. I was grateful, but my gratitude was buried under something else, a feeling of decline that seemed to grow the more I thought about it. I wasn't fired just for questioning Davidson Electronics. No, this wasn't just a case of, they didn't like what I found. Rick Patterson and the others, they were hiding something. I had been silenced. This wasn't about restructuring or cutting costs. It was about covering up something serious, and I had only scratched the surface. Sitting in Mark's small living room, I finally realized the gravity of the situation. I couldn't just walk away. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was much bigger than I could have imagined. Davidson Electronics wasn't the only company involved. I was looking at a web big enough to ensnare more than a few clients. Harrison and Blake wasn't a small firm, not in this town, and the higher-ups weren't going to let a rookie like me destroy everything they'd built. I sat down on the couch and stared at the cracks in the ceiling. My mind was racing, trying to piece everything together, but there were too many pieces. I remembered the words my father had said to me many years ago when I was a child. He had his own way of teaching me life lessons, simple but true. Don't walk away from what you believe is wrong, no matter what the cost. At that moment, I understood everything. It wasn't just about work. It was about doing the right thing, no matter what the consequences. But at what cost? I had no idea. All I knew was that I couldn't just sit there and pretend I didn't see what was happening right in front of me. I spent the next few days in a fog, hunched over my laptop, my eyes burning from hours of digging. At first, it was hard to believe. I counted the numbers over and over, checked the same transactions, hoping I had missed something. But the more I looked, the clearer it became. Davidson Electronics was just a pawn in a much larger scheme. The money they were moving wasn't just laundered cash. No, this was organized fraud, illegal deals, shady offshore accounts, things that could destroy entire industries. And when I traced the money, it led me straight to Lynch Industries, one of the largest companies in the country. They were the ones pulling the strings, hiding behind a web of shell companies and moving money around like it was pocket change. And here I was, in the middle of it all, trying to figure out how deep this rabbit hole went. It felt like I was looking at a web that stretched further than I could see. Every time I thought I'd reached a dead end, a new set of transactions would appear. This wasn't just about Davidson Electronics anymore. It was much bigger. It was Lynch Industries and possibly even more companies I hadn't stumbled upon yet. Panic began to set in. I could no longer trust anyone at Harrison and Blake. Rick Patterson was the first to make it clear, don't ask questions. But I had already asked them. Now I was stuck with what I had discovered. The only thing that kept me going was the thought that I could still do something, that I could expose everything before they shut me down for good. Sitting there staring at the numbers on the screen, I remembered Olivia Reynolds' words. Olivia had been the head of compliance at the firm for many years, and she was the only person who seemed to really care about doing things right. She was tough, even intimidating, but she always made you feel like you could trust her. She often told me, if you ever find something that doesn't make sense, don't be afraid to speak up. I hadn't seen her much lately, but I still had her contact information. Maybe it was time to get in touch with her. If anyone could help me figure this out, it was Olivia. But even as I typed her name into my phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that involving her in this might be the worst thing I could do. Her phone rang several times before she answered. Her voice was sharp and businesslike. Olivia Reynolds. Olivia, it's Adam. I fell silent, trying to figure out how to say this without sounding crazy. I found something, in the Davidson Electronics reports. Something's wrong. I need your help. There was silence on the other end of the line, a long, tense pause. I could almost hear her thinking. Olivia wasn't one for small talk, and she didn't rush into things without knowing what to expect. Finally, she spoke. You're in danger, Adam. If what you're saying is true, this is more serious than we thought. Her voice was quiet, cautious, as if she were weighing each word. Let's meet tomorrow. But understand, if they find out, it could cost us everything. Her words hit me harder than I expected. The weight of what I had just learned, the risk of it all, came crashing down on me like a heavy blanket. I felt panic rising in my chest, but I suppressed it. There was no turning back now. I had gone too far into this mess to back out. I understand, I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil raging inside me. Where do you want to meet? She gave me the address of a small cafe on the outskirts of town. It was not far from where I lived with Mark. It was a sensible choice, a secluded place where no one would notice us. We agreed on a time and hung up, but I didn't feel any relief. On the contrary, I felt even more cornered than before. The clock ticked, and as I sat there, the weight of the situation continued to grow. I could lose everything, my job, my reputation, maybe even my freedom. But I also knew I couldn't just let it go. It wasn't just about the money. It was about doing the right thing. Even if it meant risking everything. The next day, the mail arrived like a punch in the gut. It was a certified letter from Harrison and Blake. My hands shook a little as I tore open the envelope, and as soon as I read the first few lines, I knew exactly what it was. They were accusing me of theft and breach of confidentiality. The letter was cold, methodical, nothing personal, just a demand for me to return all company materials and retract my accusations about Davidson Electronics. It wasn't just some legal warning. It was a threat. They wanted to intimidate me, to shut me up before I could get any further. I sat there for a while, just staring at the words on the page. They were trying to turn the tables, painting me as the problem. But I wasn't the one doing anything illegal. I wasn't the one laundering money. Before I could even digest what I was reading, my phone rang. It was Rick Patterson. Adam, his voice was calm, almost too calm, like he was trying to keep everything under control. We need to talk. I didn't hesitate. What about? I think you know what this is about, Rick said, and I could almost hear him leaning back in his chair. I want to meet. We can fix this, Adam. Just drop the investigation. You don't want to go down this road. Think about what you're risking. His words hung in the air. He was offering a way out, at least, that's how it sounded. Like he was trying to convince me to forget everything, pretend like I never saw any of it. But there was something in his voice, a quiet desperation beneath the surface, that told me this was no longer just a friendly conversation. They were getting nervous. They were trying to cover their tracks, to erase the truth. But I couldn't back down now. Not after everything I had uncovered. Not when I knew what was really going on behind the scenes. They had made their move. And now it was my turn. I'm not backing down, Rick, I said, my voice firm even though my heart was pounding in my chest. I'm going to finish this. There was silence on the other end, just a long, drawn-out pause. Finally, Rick spoke again, his tone colder this time. Then you've made a mistake. The line went dead before I could say another word. I knew then that this wasn't just about losing my job anymore. It was about something much bigger. They weren't just trying to cover up a mistake. They were fighting for their survival. And I was in their way. But there was no turning back. Not now. Not when I knew the truth. The next morning, I met Olivia at a small cafe. The cafe was quiet, with only the soft hum of conversation and the clinking of coffee cups. When I entered, Olivia was already sitting at a corner table. She was the same as always, professional, focused. But this time there was something new in her eyes, something I hadn't noticed before. It was a kind of wariness, as if she understood how far we had gone into dangerous territory. We didn't waste any time. I sat down, moved my laptop across the table, and opened it to show her everything I had gathered. Transactions, offshore accounts, shell companies, everything. As we went through the details, I could see her eyebrows furrow with each new piece of information. She wasn't just concerned, she was alarmed. This is bad, Adam, she said quietly as she looked through the files. Lynch Industries is using Harrison and Blake as a front for illegal activities. They're not just moving money, they're laundering millions, hiding it behind a web of companies and fake accounts. And Davidson Electronics is just the tip of the iceberg. She paused for a moment, giving us time to comprehend the gravity of the situation. We were up against an entire network, and who knew how many people were involved? Influential people. People capable of crushing anyone who stood in their way. The thought made my stomach clench, but I couldn't back down. We need help, Olivia said, sliding a business card across the table. It was simple, but the name on it was anything but simple. This is FBI agent Thomas Hayes. I've worked with him before. He specializes in financial crimes. If we want to crack this case, we're going to need his help. I hesitated. The thought of involving the FBI made it all seem more real. More dangerous. But I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't uncover a conspiracy like this alone without risking everything I had left. After a long pause, I finally nodded. I'm in, I said, and the word stuck in my chest like a promise. Let's do this. Olivia didn't say anything at first. She just nodded slightly, as if to say she understood. I could see that she realized the seriousness of what we were about to embark on. This wasn't just about money or companies. This was about taking on some of the most powerful people in the country. And no one knew how far they would go to protect themselves. But I was sure of one thing, I wasn't backing down. Not when the truth was right in front of us. Olivia and I met with Agent Hayes at a secure location. We chose a small, nondescript office building on the outskirts of town, far from anything familiar. It felt like we were in the middle of nowhere, and I guess in a way, we were. The only thing that mattered was getting the truth out, no matter the cost. Agent Hayes was exactly what I expected, calm, methodical, and no nonsense. He listened intently as Olivia and I laid everything out, the financial records, the shell companies, the money laundering, the illegal trades. We explained how Lynch Industries had used Harrison and Blake as a conduit for these illicit activities, and how Davidson Electronics was just one part of the larger operation. Hayes jotted down notes, his face unreadable. When we were done, he put his pen down and looked at us. "You're in a dangerous position," he said quietly. "These people have connections everywhere. They'll try to make you pay. You need to understand that if we move forward, there's no turning back." His words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but I didn't flinch. I couldn't. We were already too far in. I nodded, meeting his gaze. "I understand. But I need to see this through. They can't get away with this." Hayes didn't say anything at first. He just stood up, signaling that our meeting was over. "We'll begin the investigation immediately," he said. "But be prepared for what's coming. These people won't go down without a fight." The investigation moved quickly after that. It was like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but at the same time, it felt like we were walking a razor's edge. Olivia and I worked around the clock, gathering more evidence, bank records, contracts, documents from third parties. We even managed to get a few secret recordings of meetings between Lynch Industries executives and the partners at Harrison and Blake. Every piece of evidence felt like a small victory, but it also made the stakes higher. Finally, the morning of the raid came. I stood outside the Harrison and Blake building, my heart pounding in my chest. FBI agents in tactical gear were moving in, swarming the front doors. I watched as they poured into the building, their presence a stark contrast to the usual calm of the office. And then I saw him. Rick Patterson. He was being escorted out of the building, his face ashen, the color drained from it. His eyes met mine for just a second, and there was something in them, defeat, maybe fear, maybe both. For a moment, I thought he might say something, but he didn't. He just looked away, as if he couldn't bear to face me. As the agents moved past, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had just set something in motion that couldn't be stopped. This wasn't just the end of Harrison and Blake. This was the beginning of something much bigger. The months that followed the raid were a blur. The investigation hit like a tidal wave, sweeping through Lynch Industries and Harrison and Blake with an unforgiving force. Several high-ranking individuals were arrested, people I had worked with, trusted, even learned from. The firm I had once considered my home was shut down, its assets seized by the government. I couldn't believe how quickly it all unraveled, how swiftly the world I knew had come crashing down. The media picked up the story quickly. Headlines blared across news sites, news channels, and newspapers. "Whistleblower exposes multi-million-dollar financial fraud," was the line that kept popping up in every headline. At first, I didn't know how to react. All I had done was the right thing. But suddenly, I was a figurehead in a media storm, and I was being asked questions I didn't have answers to. Some were congratulatory, but others were accusatory. It wasn't long before I became known as the man who brought down one of the largest financial fraud operations in the country. The fallout was swift. I received an offer from a smaller firm that appreciated my integrity and attention to detail, things that had gotten me into trouble at Harrison and Blake. They wanted someone who wouldn't turn a blind eye, someone who could spot fraud before it had a chance to grow. It felt like a new beginning, one that came with a hefty paycheck and the respect I had never gotten at my old job. In addition to that, the government gave me a substantial payout for my role in exposing the fraud. It wasn't enough to make up for what I'd lost, but it helped ease the financial strain of those months. A few months later, Agent Hayes called me. He let me know that the main players behind the operation had been convicted and sentenced. The case was closed, and the world could finally start to heal from the damage done by Lynch Industries and Harrison and Blake. He thanked me again for everything I'd done, and we hung up. I didn't feel relief, just a sense of finality. It was over, but the weight of it still lingered in the back of my mind. The financial world had changed because of the scandal. New regulations were introduced, and there was a renewed focus on transparency. The firms that used to operate in the shadows had to adjust, or they'd be exposed just like Harrison and Blake. As for Olivia, she had risen from the ashes of the scandal. She was promoted to a higher position at a new company, where her skills were recognized and valued. She had always been sharp, but now she was free of the weight of a corrupt system. And Rick Patterson? The man who had dismissed my warnings and silenced me when I spoke the truth. He was never heard from again. The media didn't cover his downfall, and the courts never seemed to touch him. He disappeared into the void, just another casualty of the empire he helped build. In the end, I realized that while everything had changed around me, I hadn't changed. I was still the same guy from that small cubicle, still trying to do the right thing. But now, I carried with me the knowledge that one person, standing up against the odds, could bring down an empire.